Hi and welcome to the video. In the previous video we've looked at creating our organizational units within our Active Directory for both computer devices as well as user accounts, and in this video we're going to be looking at creating some of our initial user accounts. We're going to go ahead to start with by opening up our Active Directory, users and computers, and from here we're going to find our organizational unit for our users. We're going to expand our top level domain and we're going to find the, in this case, MSP Tech users organizational unit, and we can see that we have our countries followed by our city. In the first instance we're going to be using our LND London office for creating a user, and then we're going to be looking at the ways that we can create this user. In the first instance, with a completely greenfield Active Directory or completely blank Active Directory, our initial process will be to create the user from scratch. And to do that, once we've selected the relevant organizational unit for our user, we can go ahead and click the new user or create new user in the current container, and we already have our current container selected, so we're going to go ahead and click that just at the top there. At this point we can see that it is creating the object, in this case the user object, in the domain, followed by the MSP Tech users, followed by the country, followed by the office location, which is correct. And we are presented with a few options. When we initially create the user, the options that we are given are quite limited, but once the user is created, we can then specify many more additional attributes. In this particular example, we're going to be creating a user called Osborne Todd, and we're going to go through that process now. So in the first name, we're going to go ahead and type Osborne, and in our last name, we're going to go ahead and select Todd. When we type the first name and last name in, what we will see is that the username, the full name of Osborne Todd is automatically pre-populated for us. Unless there's a reason to change this, we can leave this as default. We can move on to the user logon name. In our domain environment, we're going to be following the first name dot last name process for all of our users' logon names. So in this particular instance, it's going to be Osborne dot Todd. It is worth noting, as with Active Directory as well as Exchange, which we'll move on to in later videos when we introduce the Exchange environment, the user logon name has to be unique, which means that in some situations, if there is a very frequently used name, for example John Smith, we may end up in a position that we have to amend the user's logon name to John Smith 1, John Smith 2, John Smith 3. Again, this would depend on the size of the organization and on the policies that the company have in place. In our example, we don't have any duplicate names at this point, so we will come to that later on as we create more users in additional videos and how we can handle that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and click on the next button, and we're going to see the next page. And in this instance, it's asking us now for the password and to confirm the password, which we're going to go ahead and do right now. As with all passwords, ideally this should be a secure complex password. However, that will be down to the company's policies and procedures, and obviously best practices that you follow. Once we've typed the password and confirmed the password, we have 4 tick boxes available to us. First tick box is already selected for us, and that is that the user must change password next logon. This is typically a standard practice in that once the account has been created, the IT department will no longer need to know that user's password, although they can reset it at a later date if needs be. The user can then automatically change the password when they log in to something more memorable. The next option is user cannot change password. This can be used in very particular instances when a user should not be able to change their password for whatever reason. There are some situations where this may need to be used, and that will be on a case-by-case basis. But typically that would be left unticked, as it's good practice or best practice that the user change their password on a frequent basis. Next option is password never expires, and for user accounts this typically isn't selected. However, for service accounts, which we will cover in another video, this would usually be used because as a password expires, it may prevent a service from running. The last account is the last tick box is account is disabled, and this option would be used typically for either a user that is not yet active or if you have a templated user account. A templated user account would be one that has permissions and group assignments pre-configured, and then, as we'll show in the next part of the video, you will copy that account to create your new accounts. In this instance, for this user, we're not going to be selecting that, and instead we're going to go ahead and click Next. On the final page, we'll have a quick summary of what we've asked for to be created, and we can see here that the full name is Osborne Todd. We can see the user logon name, which is first name dot last name at our domain, and then the main option of the user must change password at next logon. As long as these details are correct, we can go ahead and click Finish. When we click Finish, we'll now see our new user created within our LND London organisational unit, and we can go ahead and double click the user. At this point, as mentioned previously, we can see that there are multiple tabs here, and some of these are security based and for other features, but there's also additional user details that we can provide. Under the General, we can see that the first name, last name and display name is as we typed in on the previous screens, but there's also a description, an office, telephone number, email and web page field. As we follow through the other tabs, mostly those along the bottom here, we can go to address, and we can specify address details for this user. As we move to account, we can modify some of the account details, and then as we move to profile, we can see that there are user profiles and home folder profiles. Again, these will be covered in later videos. Under telephones, we can see there's multiple options for different attributes that can be edited, as well as a notes field. And then finally the organisation, and this would include job title, department, company, manager, and direct reports. In this particular instance, we're not going to go through too many of these. However, we will cover some of how we fill in some of these additional fields automatically as we PowerShell in some of the users. For now though, we're going to close off this user, and at this point this user can log on to an endpoint based on the username and password we've created. Once we have a user account created, we can use this as a template and we can copy the user to create our next. In this case, we're going to select our current user, we're going to right click, and we're going to select the option of copy. And this will help us create our second user. Once again, we're given the same details. You will notice at the top it says copy object-user, and it will specify that we are copying the user as opposed to creating a new object. Once again, the create in directory is pre-populated, and we can see that that's going into the exact same location as the current user, and that's the behavior that we would expect. For this user, we're going to be typing in the name of Julie Beasley. And once again, the full name is pre-populated based on what we've typed in for first and last name. And we're going to go ahead and select user logon name. Once again, we're going to follow the same practice, which is first name dot last name. And in this case, that will be Julie.Beasley. Once these details are entered, we can go ahead and click Next. And much like before, we're going to be asked for the password, confirmation of password, and then the tick boxes to be selected. As before, we're going to go ahead and select our password. And once we've confirmed that, we're going to go ahead and tick the boxes accordingly. It is worth noting when you copy an object, such as a user account, it will pre-populate these 4 tick boxes based on the previous account. In the example of Osborne Todd being copied for Julie, we can see that the user must change password and next logon tick box is pre-populated, and that's to be expected. If this was a templated user account, as I say, which we'll cover in later videos, then the relevant tick boxes would also be pre-populated and pre-ticked. Typically, a template account will be disabled, so you would have to ensure that the account is disabled tick box is unticked. In this example though, this is absolutely fine, so we're going to go ahead and click Next, and then we're going to go ahead and check the summary. As we can see in the summary, this time it specifies it is copying from the previous user, in this case Osborne Todd, and then it specifies the same details as before. As long as these details are correct, we can go ahead and click Finish, and that user will now appear in our organizational unit. Now that we've created our user accounts manually in the first instance, we're now going to look at how we can import multiple users at any one time using PowerShell. To do this, there's two things that we need to have. First of all, we need to have a file which contains all of the details for our users, and secondly, a PowerShell script which will import the details into Active Directory. Both of these will be available as a template within the description for download. However, in the example we've created our CSV document in the first instance using Excel, and we can see here that we have multiple fields for each of the attributes within Active Directory. In the first few columns we have first name, last name, followed by username, and we followed the first name dot last name principle. The next fields contain also the address based on street address, city, zip code or postcode, state or county, and we also have department specified. J and K columns have telephone and job title also specified, and column L specifies the company details or the company name. Although we are representing msptech.co.uk as the company name, you may have multiple subsidiary companies, and so these could be different, and that would be absolutely fine. The two remaining fields are the password field, and in here what we have done is specified different passwords for our users so that they're not all identical, although you could do that if required. However, typically in this case we've just done some very simple passwords with character changes for each one. The last part of the CSV document is the M column currently, which is the OU or OU location, or the organizational unit. In this case, this has been pre-populated from our AD, and in order to get this location, we need to check Active Directory, and we can pull this from the organizational unit that the user is going to go into. If we take a look at that now, in the first example, we have our users in L&D London. In order to view the attribute or the OU details, we need to firstly ensure that the advanced features are turned on. So within Active Directory Users and Computers, we're going to click on View, and we're going to ensure that the tick box for Advanced Features is enabled. With this enabled, we can select the organizational unit that the users are going to go into. We can right-click, and we can select Properties. From here, we'll have the organizational unit properties, and at the far end, we will see there is an Attribute Editor tab. If we click on this, we're looking for the attribute of distinguished name, and we can see that listed just here. When we double click on distinguished name, we'll be giving the full string or the full details for the particular organizational unit we've selected. And in this case, we can see it's L&D London, followed by the remainder of all the OUs. This is then duplicated into our CSV document for the location that that user is going to be. And in the example we have, we'll just bring our document across, and we can see here that the OU represents the same. So we have OU London, L&D London, followed by GB United Kingdom, MSP Tech, MSP Tech User, AD, and then MSP Tech Co UK. We'll go through how the attributes for this particular distinguished name work later on in other videos, but for now we can just go ahead and copy this entire string into the document, and using that is where our users will populate. We're going to close this one off for this organizational unit, and as an example we're now going to choose New Zealand Belfast. We're going to go ahead and right click on BEL-Belfast, as this is where we're going to populate some of our users. We'll select on Properties. Once again we'll go to Attribute Editor, and we're looking for the distinguished name. Again, when we double click that, this will give us a full string that we can copy, and then we can put this into our document by going right click, copy, and then we can go ahead and paste it into our Excel or CSV document. And as we can see here, we have our London users listed just here, we have our Manchester users listed here, our Los Angeles users listed here, and our Belfast users listed here. Once we've created the CSV document, we can go ahead and upload this to our server. in this case, this has already been done. We're going to go ahead and click on File Explorer. We're going to go ahead to this PC, local disk C, and we've created a folder called MSP Tech. And within this folder, we have our bulk user import.csv document, and we also have our PowerShell script that we're going to run to import these users. We're going to go ahead and just open up the PowerShell script so we can demonstrate what's being done in the background. What this PowerShell script will do is firstly import Active Directory as a module so that it can access the full features. And secondly, it will look to the location specified, in this case C drive, root C drive, MSP Tech, and then bulk user import and .csv. From there, it's going to read each line in the document, and then based on the information that we provided, it will then read all of that user data and attempt to import it into Excel. We've also put a verification check in, and that is to check if the user is already existing in Active Directory, and if it does, we'll get a warning that our user account already exists. Otherwise, if the account is not present, we can go ahead and import the remainder of the attributes for that user, and the user itself will be created. Again, these templated documents will be in the description ready for download. However, there will also be some Microsoft documentation on best practices and alternatively or additionally the additional attributes that you can apply and put into one document. For now though, we're going to go ahead and close our PowerShell editor and we're going to run the script. There's two ways to do this. We can initially right click and run with PowerShell, and that will run the script. Alternatively, we can run it from the PowerShell command line interface. And we can do that by right clicking on our start button, go into Windows PowerShell, and from here we just need to specify the location of our script. And we can do that by typing that in. So in this case it'll be root drive C, followed by the MSP Tech folder that it's located within, and then we'll do bulk user import, and we're looking for the .ps1 script. Once we've entered the details, we can go ahead and press enter, and that will continue to import all of the users. As you can see, as we already created our osborne.todd and julie.beasley user accounts, we've been given a warning that the user account already exists. This is to be expected as we've just gone through that. We can now validate that the rest of the users have been created and imported by closing off our PowerShell and our File Explorer. If we go to top level of our domain and we do a refresh at the top level, that will refresh all of the objects within the domain. And we can now expand out MSP Tech users and each of our country codes and sites, and we can go ahead and select the city location, in this case L&D London, and we can now see that we have multiple users in the OU. The same is true for Manchester, Belfast, and also Los Angeles. At this point we can now go ahead and validate that each of the attributes have been imported correctly, and to do that we're going to select Tyler Swindlehurst as our example user. We're going to double click, and from here we can see that immediately on the general page we can see that there is a telephone number listed for this user. We can then move along to address, and we can see that we have address details specified. We can also move along to the organizational tab at the far end, and we can see that the job title of Senior Engineer, Department Engineer, and the company msptech.co.uk have all been specified. Obviously with large user imports, PowerShell scripting can be very powerful, and we can specify multiple of these attributes in order to be able to import them in one go. As a side note, it's obviously very good to have a clear documented process for new user creations, and this will be covered in a later video also, but a working relationship with the recruitment team or HR Human Resources Department will allow this to be fundamentally created, and if there is a large influx of users, you can import those in one go. It also goes without saying that even on individual user accounts, it would be best practice to populate as much of the Active Directory attributes as possible, as later on in additional videos and later on down the line as the company grows, each of these attributes can be pulled individually for each of the users. So if you need to be able to pull a user's telephone number to make a phone call to them, if the attribute is already within Active Directory, that can be pulled through. The same is true for additional telephones or additional address details or organizational details. At At this point, we've now created multiple AD user accounts, and these user accounts will have permission to be able to log on to our endpoints. Going back to the beginning of the video, as we've now created these accounts, we're going to test that we can log on to our endpoint devices. And to do that, we're going to emulate the Windows 10 machine we have just here, and we're going to go ahead and log in with our Osborne Todd user. So from the logon screen, we're going to go ahead and select Other User in the lower left corner, and we're going to go ahead and type in our user's username. In this case, it'll be osborne.todd, followed by the password that we used when we created the account. When we go to log in with this account, as we had ticked the box which forced the user to change the password in the next login, it should prompt us immediately to change the password. As we can see here, the user's password must be changed before signing in. We're going to go ahead and click OK, and this is where the user would type in their new password. Once they've selected their new password and confirmed, they can continue to log in with the details, where it will change the password and specify that that's been completed. At that point there, the user account will be created and they'll be presented with the desktop. This will take a few moments, so whilst that's doing that, we're going to go ahead and test our other user account on our second workstation, and we're going to log in as Julie. So once again, we're going to go to our logon screen, we're going to go to Other User, and we're going to select Julie.Beasley. Type in the password that was specified during the account creation. And once again, we should be prompted to change the password, to which we'll go OK, and we'll specify a new password for the user. Once that's been done, that will continue to log us into the user's desktop and build their profile. If we go back to our first user, as we can see, we're now logged into the desktop, and we can validate that we're logged in as the correct user by right-clicking on our Start menu, and we can go to Windows PowerShell. And what will happen is it will actually tell us C users osborne.todd is our username. A few other ways of doing this also, but this is just a quick, easy way. And then we can also validate the exact same for our other user, Julie, as we go back to machine number 2. And same process, we're going to right-click the Start menu, and we're going to go ahead and run PowerShell, and it will specify that it's running from that user, in this case C users Julie.Beasley. At this point, we've managed to create the additional user accounts for our Active Directory, and we've demonstrated that we can now log on with those user accounts. At this point, we haven't assigned any additional permissions to the users or to the machines, and we'll be covering that in our next video.